Welcome to Deep Dive, the show where we really get into complex topics, pull out the key insights, those surprising facts, all custom tailored for you. Today we're diving into, well, the hidden language of molecules, acid-base chemistry. It's actually the secret behind stuff you see every day, maybe without even realizing it. Ever put lemon juice on fish to, cut that fishy smell? That's acids and bases working. Or maybe you made one of those baking soda and vinegar rockets, or you just bake some bread. It all relies on these acid-base reactions. They're fundamental to life, really, and absolutely critical if you want to grasp, well, the huge world of organic chemistry. So our mission today, we're going to simplify things, break down these core concepts, pulling insights directly from a key organic chemistry text. By the end, you should have a much clearer picture of what acids and bases are, how to figure out their strengths just by looking at them, and even how to predict what they'll do in a reaction. Think of it as like the decoder ring for a big part of chemistry.
Absolutely. And, this isn't just for chemists in training,
Yeah.
understanding acids and bases. It's like getting a new lens to see almost every reaction in organic chemistry. It really is the backbone. So this deep dive, it's essentially a shortcut, a way to get you really well informed on this super vital topic. It helps you intuitively get why molecules react the way they do.
Okay, let's unpack this then. You might think defining acid and base is simple, right? But it turns out there are actually three main ways chemists define them today. Three different viewpoints.
That's right. The story kind of starts with the Arrhenius definition. Named after Svante Arrhenius, he actually won a Nobel Prize for his work on this stuff. So for Arrhenius, an Arrhenius acid is basically any molecule that when you put it in water, it dissociates and makes the hydronium ion H3O plus gusta. Think of nitric acid, HNO3. That's a strong one. Completely breaks apart in water. Then you have something like acetic acid, CH3COH. That's vinegar, which is a weak Arrhenius acid. It only partly dissociates. And on the flip side, an Arrhenius base is something that dissociates in water to produce hydroxide ions, OH. Potassium hydroxide, KOH, that's a strong base, dissolves completely. Beryllium hydroxide, BOH2, much weaker, only partially dissolves.
Okay, so that sounds pretty useful. It laid the groundwork. But why did we need more definitions then? What was missing?
Well, the Arrhenius definition, yeah, it was revolutionary, but it had some, let's say, basic problems. First, it really only works for things dissolved in water. That cuts out a huge number of reactions right there. And second, it didn't really explain bases like ammonia, NH3. Ammonia acts like a base, right? It makes hydroxide in water. But look at the formula. There's no OH group in NH3 itself. It makes hydroxide by reacting with the water. So the definition didn't quite cover everything.
Oh, okay, so it was a bit too narrow in scope. Which brings us then to the Brønsted-Lowry definition. You said this is the main one for organic chemistry.
Precisely. This is the one you'll use most often. So under Brønsted-Lowry, an acid is simply a proton donor. And remember, a proton is just H+, and a Brønsted-Lowry base is a proton acceptor. It takes that H+ from the acid.
H+ is called a proton just because it's lost its electron, right? Just the nucleus left.
Exactly, just a bare proton. And what's really key here is the idea of conjugate pairs. When the acid gives up its proton, what's left behind? That's its conjugate base. Often it's negatively charged. And when the base grabs that proton, it turns into its conjugate acid. They always come in these pairs. Acid turns into conjugate base, base turns into conjugate acid.
Okay, that makes sense. Proton donor, proton acceptor. But then there's one more definition, the most general one. Lewis acids and bases.
Yes, the Lewis definition is the broadest. It shifts the focus from protons to electrons. A Lewis acid is any species that accepts a pair of electrons to make a new covalent bond. You'll often hear these called electrophiles, literally electron lovers. A good example is borane, BH3. Boron doesn't have a full octet of electrons, so it's quite eager to accept an electron pair. And a Lewis base, naturally, is an electron pair donor. It provides the electrons for that new bond. We also call these nucleophiles, meaning nucleus lovers, because they're drawn to positive centers that need electrons, like methylamine, CH3NH2. It has a lone pair of electrons it can easily donate. And here's the connection. Any Brønsted-Lowry acid is also technically a Lewis acid, and any Brønsted-Lowry base is a Lewis base. The Lewis definition just covers more ground.
Okay, so Lewis is the big umbrella definition covering all electron pair sharing, and Brønsted-Lowry is kind of a specific, very common case under that umbrella focusing on the proton. But if Lewis is so general, Why do organic chemists tend to stick with Brønsted-Lowry most of the time?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It really boils down to convenience and intuition for organic reactions. Most of the time in organic chemistry, it's just simpler and more direct to think about reactions in terms of where that proton, the H+A, is going, who's giving it up, who's taking it. While Lewis is, technically more complete, Brønsted-Lowry just gives a clearer picture of the vast majority of reactions you'll actually encounter day to day. It's more practical. But before we move on, a really critical word of caution here. A molecule isn't just an acid or a base on its own. It's always relative. It depends entirely on what it's reacting with. Take water. Water can act as both an acid and a base. We call that amphoteric. It can donate a proton or accept one, depending on the situation. Heck, even something strong like nitric acid can be forced to act as a base if you put it next to something even stronger, like sulfuric acid. So this raises a key point. How do we avoid just sticking rigid labels on molecules if their behavior really depends on the context?
That's a really important distinction. Context is everything. So the big takeaway from these definitions, Arrhenius started it, Brønsted-Lowry is our go-to for proton transfers in organic chem, and Lewis is the big picture electron view. And the key thing is, it's all relative strength. Molecules react based on who's stronger or weaker in that specific interaction. No fixed labels. Okay, definitions down. Now, how do we actually compare strengths? How can you look at a molecule's structure and get a sense of how strong an acid it is? This feels like where the detective work starts.
It really is, and it's a super useful skill. The main principle is this. The strength of an acid is directly linked to the stability of its conjugate base.
The conjugate base, right? That's the molecule left after the acid loses its proton, usually negative.
Exactly. And so what's fascinating is the more stable you can make that negative charge on the conjugate base, the stronger the original acid must have been. So we look for things in the structure that help spread out or stabilize that negative charge.
Okay, let's dive into those structural clues. What are we looking for?
Right. First up, comparing the atoms that actually hold the negative charge in the conjugate base. Rule 1. Negative charges prefer to sit on more electronegative atoms, atoms that love electrons. So generally, a negative charge is happier on an oxygen than on a nitrogen, and happier on nitrogen than on carbon. This directly explains why alcohols with the ROH group are more acidic than amines, RNH2, which are more acidic than alkenes, RCH3. The conjugate base is more stable with the charge on OVS and VSC, but, and this is really crucial, atom size often matters more than electronegativity. Negative charges are actually more stable on larger atoms. Why? Because that charge can be spread out over a much bigger volume. It's less concentrated, more diffuse, more stable. So think about the halogens. Fluorine is the most electronegative, right? But HI, hydrogen iodide, is a much stronger acid than HF, hydrogen fluoride.
Wait, even though F less electrons more than I?
Exactly, because the iodide ion, I is huge compared to the fluoride ion. F, that negative charge is spread over a much larger space on iodine, making it way more stable. So size wins in that column of the periodic table. It's a bit counterintuitive at first. Okay, next structural clue. Atom hybridization. This has to do with the type of orbital holding the lone pair, the negative charge, in the conjugate base. The electrons in that lone pair prefer orbitals with more is character. Why? Because as its orbitals are closer to the nucleus, holding those electrons tighter and making them more stable. So an anion is most stable in Ag orbital, that's 50% character, then sp2, 33%, and least stable in sp3, only 25%.
So the more S, the closer to the nucleus, the more stable the negative charge.
You got it. Then we have electronegativity effects from other atoms in the molecule. We call these inductive effects. If you have electron-withdrawing groups, atoms like fluorine, chlorine, oxygen attached near the acidic site, they pull electron density towards themselves through the sigma bonds. This pull helps to draw electron density away from the negative charge on the conjugate base, effectively spreading it out and stabilizing it. Like trifluoroethanol. It's way more acidic than regular ethanol because those three very electronegative fluorine atoms are pulling electron density away, stabilizing the negative charge on the oxygen after the proton leaves. And finally, maybe the most powerful stabilizing effect, resonance. This is a huge one. If the conjugate base can delocalize its negative charge across multiple atoms through resonance structures, the acid will be much, much stronger. Resonance is just a fantastic way to spread out charge and increase stability. Think about acetic acid versus ethanol again. Acetic acid's conjugate base, acetate, can spread that negative charge over two oxygen atoms using resonance. Ethanol's conjugate base can't do that. Yeah. That resonance stabilization is why acetic acid is millions of times more acidic than ethanol.
Wow, okay. So electronegativity, atom size, remember size, can trump electronegativity. Hybridization inductive effects from nearby groups, and resonance. That's quite a toolkit. Just by analyzing those features, you can make pretty good predictions about relative acid strength, all without needing numbers. Gives you that molecular intuition. But, sometimes intuition isn't enough. Sometimes you need the actual numbers. Which brings us to the quantitative side. How do we put a precise number on acidity?
Right, this is where pK enters the picture. The pKa is the standard numerical scale we use to measure a molecule's acidity quantitatively. Technically, it comes from the acid dissociation constant, chi, which is an equilibrium constant. The pKa just means take the negative logarithm, so pKa to log ka. Using the log scale is just a convenient way to handle the enormous range of acid strengths out there, from incredibly strong to unbelievably weak. It compresses the scale, kind of like the Richter scale for earthquakes. And the key thing to remember is the inverse relationship. The lower the pKa value, the stronger the acid is. The higher the pKa value, the weaker the acid.
Lower pKa, stronger acid. Higher pKa, weaker acid. Got it.
Exactly. So just to give you a feel for the numbers, really strong acids like sulfuric acid, H2SO4, have pK values less than 0, maybe around number 7. The hydronium ion itself, H3O plus, is about numbers 2. Then you get into weaker acids. Hydrogen cyanide, HCN, has a pK of 9. A typical alcohol, ROH, is around pK 16, and something incredibly weak, like methane, CH4, has a pK way up around 50. It really doesn't want to give up a proton.
Having that numerical scale, pK really allows for precise comparisons. You can see exactly how much stronger one acid is than another. Very powerful. Okay, so we know the definitions, we know how structure affects strength, and we have a number, pKa, to measure it. Now for the grand finale. Using all this to predict what actually happens in an acid-base reaction.
Right, this is where it all comes together. This is the practical payoff. And the core rule is actually quite simple. Acid-base reactions will always proceed or favor the side with the weakest acids and bases.
Weakest acids and bases. Why is that?
Because weaker means more stable, lower in energy. And chemical systems naturally tend towards the lowest possible energy state. So the reaction goes in the direction that produces the more stable, weaker species. Now, for practical problem solving, here's the most useful way to think about that rule. The equilibrium of an acid-base reaction will always favor the side that has the acid with the higher pKa.
Higher pKa, because higher pKa means weaker acid.
Exactly. So if you know the pKa values of the acid on the left side of the equation, the reactant, and the conjugate acid on the right side, the product, you just compare them. The side with the higher pKa value is the side the equilibrium will favor. It's your secret weapon for predicting reaction outcomes.
Okay, let's try the example you mentioned. Hydrogen cyanide, HCN, reacting with acetate ion, C2H3O2. So on the left, the acid is HCN. On the right, if acetate takes the proton, it becomes acetic acid, CH3COH. That's the conjugate acid.
Perfect. Now we just need their pKa values. HCN, we said, has a pKa of 9, and acetic acid has a pKa of 5.
Okay, 9 versus 5.
So which pKa is higher?
9. HCN's pKa.
Right. Since HCN has the higher pKa, 9 versus 5, it's the weaker acid. Therefore, the equilibrium will lie to the left, favoring the reactants HCN and acetate. The reaction prefers to stay on the side with the weaker acid.
And that's surprisingly straightforward. Compare the pKa of the acid on the left and the conjugate acid on the right. Whichever pKa is higher, that's the side the reaction favors. Simple as that.
Simple as that. It gives you a clear prediction.
What an incredible deep dive, seriously. We've gone from the different ways to even define acids and bases, Arrhenius, Brønsted-Lowry, Lewis, to figuring out how their structure dictates their strength, looking at atoms, size, resonance, and finally using that simple number, pKa, to actually predict which way a reaction will go. We've really covered the acids and the bases today, hopefully helping you really get these fundamental ideas.
Absolutely. And, this does raise an interesting thought. Next time you're looking at, say, the ingredients on a food label, or maybe grabbing some cleaning supplies like vinegar or bleach, how might you think about their properties a bit differently now, knowing what you know about acids and bases, these principles we talked about? They're everywhere. It gives you a whole new perspective.
That's a great point. Your understanding of the everyday chemical world just got a serious upgrade. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into these organic chemistry fundamentals, and thanks for letting us be your shortcut to being well-informed. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.